Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. My co-host, Ansgar, is not here with me today. Instead, I have my guest, Ansgar Odinson, with me here on In Time. Ansgar, how are you?
That was pretty good. The flight from the top window to the bottom window was a little tiring.
Jet
Getting a
lag,
little
are
bit of
you?
jet lag, yeah, but I
Yeah.
think I'll be all right. I've got a cup of coffee here. I'm fine.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're uh, if anyone has anything, we're going to be watching the live chat. You can also do super chats if you have questions for Ansgar. And I this is an interesting show because this show it took the longest to produce. You'd think it was the easiest. This one took the longest to produce. I think we started production of this show 8 months ago, maybe a little bit
we
longer,
s-
depending on how you.
yeah, we started production on this show before we even decided we had a show.
Yes. So what had happened was, I really wanted to start some of my own content. I was doing Ask a Philosopher. I was doing a few other streams, and I said it's time I build up my channel. And Ansgar and I had met, and we were friends. We had known each other for a little while, but we hadn't really interacted a whole heck of a lot. I had you and Growley on Ask a Philosopher, and that went spectacularly well.
Wonderful
And
show.
wonderful show, still one of my favorite shows. It was just great. And in fact, actually, we booted Steve, and it was just you, myself, and Crowley, and we brought in some people afterwards. But for the first half of the show, it was just us. Like, nah, Steve can go. And so it was a great show. And so I said, but you have had a very interesting life, and I obviously in many respects very different from mine, and although enough similarities that we can get along and we can, but and I just said, what? Aside from the fact that we work well together and we clearly can do this, I think you're really interesting. Would you come onto my show and I want to interview you? And you said, okay, great. And we start talking about what we're going to do for the interview, and then um, afterwards you say, Nick, I could interview you too. It's just like on my own channel. That sounds a little weird, but you know what? I kind of like that idea. And but yeah,
Hmm?
but wait a minute, it's my channel. People are going to want to hear about me. Why don't we do that? They like, and then we had this great rapport. And you're like, I could come on a few times, and we could do. I was like, yeah, why don't we do that? And
Yeah.
yeah, we just keep adding to it. And but finally we're like, it needs to have its own channel. Yeah, it does need to have its own channel. It needs to move, and then In Time was born, and it was born out of this idea that I'm going to interview this guy here. That was the only show we had planned. That was the first
That's it.
show, and it wasn't going to be its on channel. So
And then
ostensibly,
you just happened to be playing with OBS, and a breaking news happened while you were playing with OBS, and he said, "Hey, no, be a good idea, a show where we actually cover breaking news." Wait a minute, there's this guy I've been
yeah,
planning to interview and wanted to interview me. Let's yeah, that
yep,
was
yeah. It was a lot of bizarre things. So this is what I find so interesting about this, which is we had planned this for such a long time. Really, without the idea of this interview here, we would not have had In Time. And so now, after all these shows, after all this, here we are finally doing this interview. Ansgar, who are you?
well, first of all, this will complete the show. We shut it down. There'll be nothing more interesting to talk about after this now. um
Sure.
um I
I'm
guess I
sure
would
this is going to shut down the show, but not because not. It'll be interesting, Ansgar, but in a very dumpster fire, you know, um,
Oh, did you just
in a
call my
very
life a
towering
dumpster fire?
inferno kind of way.
Did you just call my life a dumpster fire? I'm triggered. I am canceling. I'm gonna get some friends. We're gonna cancel this show. The
Oh, Jesus. This is
Canceled.
yeah. You're not the first guest to suggest that you're going to try to get the show canceled, but you are the one I least expected to do that. Um, I'm going
um,
to have you talk with my co-host afterwards. Maybe he can get you to chillax.
maybe I hear he's good at that.
Yeah, well, he's got to be good at something because, frankly, it's kind of his hosting abilities. But all right.
Oh man. So who am I? I guess I would define myself as a social activist and artist. That's really what I would define myself as. It's what I've been most of my life anyways. Um I've always tried to use my art and my storytelling to put my ideas out into the zeitgeist and hope that some of them, and at least at some part, stick. Because I know my ideas have always been rather, unconventional and rather kind of out there and radical. So I know that they're not just going to immediately, you know, be adopted by the public. But I hope to move the needle a little bit for sure.
We actually had a question that was a joke question, but I know you're going to like this because we had this discussion right before we went live. The question from alias fake name: when is Hat going to interview Chair?
Oh, that we have that plan too.
We do have that planned, and we were going to have Hat be the host today, but we didn't have time to set that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, where were you born, and what was your life like growing up?
Okay. I don't remember exactly where I was born, but I remember growing. My earliest memories growing up. I lived in Long Beach, California. Lived in California all my life. Most of my growing up, though, happened in Pasadena. Now we moved out of a crappy apartment when I was 2.5, I think.
Mhm.
Like we're talking about an apartment where they named the roaches. It was so bad. Um, yeah, yeah. I remember Papa Roach. That was the biggest roach in the house that they couldn't seem to kill. Um,
Oh,
so that gives you an idea of my very early childhood. And we moved into Pasadena, which was a house that my grandfather owned. In fact, my great grandfather was a baker in Old Town Pasadena. Before that was Old Town, it was just downtown Pasadena, and he built that house. My grandfather inherited it when my great grandfather died, and to help my mother out, he gave her a place to live rent free. Um, very generous, actually, especially considering in my family, you show love and affection through gifts and money. That's just kind of how they did. Even the so. Anyways, my early childhood was probably most well punctuated by two things that I can remember. Some people's personal history, like, okay, when you tell world history, you go from one war to the next. Typically, that's like the big punctuations. Well, my life
yes, yes.
was my mother's different people that she married. that's how that was punctuated. Um, she was by the time we moved into past the Pasadena house. She'd already been married twice since and that doesn't include my birth father, who she never married.
Did you
Um,
did you ever meet your birth father?
Later on in life, yes. When I was about 25, my wife helped me track down my birth father, and he was nobody I really wanted to know. And I didn't. I mean, when I shit, man, he literally said the White House is painted white for a reason.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then I found out that he, like, pawned off all the Christmas presents that I had given him, including some hand drawn art and stuff like that. So yeah, that wasn't a good meeting. I don't really have any birth family that is particularly wonderful. Let's just say. So no, but my early childhood was punctuated by many people in and out of our lives. And Godzilla was a big part of my young life. I
Godzilla. Well,
Godzilla.
yeah, first of all, I know that's not entirely true because when you say Godzilla was a big part of your young life, you imply he's not a big part of your life right now. And every time
Fair
I
enough.
call you, if I'm calling on the stream, I was like, oh, I got a DM Ansgar. I call, all of a sudden I hear Godzilla broadcast over the stream.
Yeah, well, well, see, you have to understand here. I had kind of a troubled childhood,
Hmm.
and I realized that somebody's career, their entire livelihood, got to be made by putting on a giant dinosaur suit and destroying model cities. Like, imagine, the mind of a small boy, and they find out that you can literally make an entire career out of destroying model cities in a costume. So yeah.
I notice you keep putting the word model in. Was it your life ambition to destroy model cities or to actually destroy real cities?
Well, I
Did
had
you
to
want to?
settle for model cities
You
because
had to settle for models.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Reed
got.
wants to know if I actually graduated college, but I think that we'll get to that later in
I
the
saw, yeah, I saw that, and
yeah.
I was gonna maybe mention in the live chat that we'll get to it, and I just figured we'll get to it. Um, so we'll get to it, or yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
If we don't, you can yeah. So now what? How was so you went through a number of successive step parents, and so what were they like?
Well, the ones that I remember well, the first one that I really remember was came into my life when I was, I would say, about 5 or 6. Now he was an electrician, and he was very much the machismo kind of guy, suck it up,
Hmm.
pussy, that kind of dude.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a permanent injury working on one of his job sites. He was forcing me to carry pails of concrete, and this shoulder right here actually locked up to the point where my head was stuck like this for like something like 6 days. Couldn't move my neck really. And every
Hmm.
once in a while, this shoulder just flares up, the old injury. But yeah, he was very much one of those, suck it up, pussy kind of guys. Um,
Yeah.
he was in my life for quite a while actually, and I remember I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this, but I would come home from school, and the first thing I would do is I would check the driveway, and I knew I was going to have a good day and a happy day with my mother if his car wasn't there. If his car
Yeah.
was there, I knew I would just try to head to my room, keep my head down, keep the door shut. Now, he was never physically abusive. He was just very verbally abusive. I do have a funny story about him, though. Very
Oh,
funny story.
please.
So, first of all, he got into all these get rich quick schemes all the time, right? Like,
I should have guessed that. I think I should have honestly guessed that. I should have seen
yeah,
that coming.
yeah. But he decided that the best way to get rich was for him to leave the electrical company that he was working for and go strike out on his own. So he bought himself this, like, early adopters, like Apple personal computer kind of thing.
Mm.
I forget what that was called, but it was the kind that had the tower that was, that laid flat, and the monitor that sat on top of it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, those old ones. So, anyways, he builds a personal like office out in the garage. Well, fire safety, even though he was an electrician, for some reason fire safety wasn't exactly, a priority for him, and so the
It
garage
wasn't his
actually
wheelhouse.
burned down. Now he had so many chemicals from his days as a photographer
Hmm.
in the garage, that the thick wooden garage doors. Now we're talking about one of those garage doors, the old kind on the steel frame that just lift up like this, just the one solid door and wide enough
Yep,
for two
yep,
cars to drive in. It
yep.
literally blew off the hinges and landed 15 feet away from the garage.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah, this is no small fire. Well, he brings the computer into the house, and it is melted, right? And he swears it's gonna work, and my mom is yelling at him. She is yelling at him that do not plug that into my kitchen. Do not plug that in. So he plugs the fucking thing in, right? He turns the thing on, and amazingly, the screen starts to, flicker on. The next thing that happens, you remember the old Apple error message that came up with a picture of a bomb?
Yes, yeah, the picture of the bomb, and
Yeah,
it
it
would
goes
have like a
boom.
digit code right underneath. Yep, yep,
Right.
yep.
So the bomb picture comes up, and I swear to God, you could not have timed this better. Half a second later, all the lights go out and sparks start flying out of the computer. And when all the light fades, all you can see is just the small flicker of a flame inside the case. And she starts slapping him on the shoulder, and she's yelling at him, "I told you so! I told you so!" Oh my God. Oh, oh, that
Oh,
was. uh, he also gave me bad food poisoning, nearly killed me.
oh,
Uh,
good.
yeah. My mother put a oh, this will give you an idea of his attitude. So my mother put a turkey in the oven and said, after a certain time, make sure that you take it out. Right. Well, he turned
Yeah,
the
yeah.
oven off, but he never took it out. He left it in there all night. So
Okay.
the next, so the next morning, my mother tells him, "Listen, you left it out. You have to throw it away." No, no, it's so good. No, you have to throw it away. So she comes home from work and he's feeding it to me. Of course, she freaks out. It'll be fine. Okay, so the next morning, I'm sick. I mean, I can't eat breakfast, and he is so wanting to not be guilty. He is trying to force me to eat breakfast. He is literally sitting over me and trying to force cereal into my face.
Yep,
He's
yep.
convinced that he can just hand wave it away and then
He can will this to not be his fault.
right. So I got sick for 2.5 weeks. Food poisoning. Worse, he then threw the turkey away. The dog ate it, got sick, and died.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah. It
Well,
was
I'm sure that was a complete coincidence.
complete. You know, it had nothing to do with him leaving that. But yeah, he really thought that if he could just force me to eat breakfast and go to school, it would all go away. I was just faking. I
Yeah.
must have heard my mother over, talking about it or something like that. Oh, that was
Or magical thinking, magical thinking. It's just, well, if I pretend it's,
yeah.
oh God.
Well, that
So then,
relationship came to an end
yep.
when my mother started dating his friend, a woman named Lynn, and moved her in, but he refused to move out. Once again, magical thinking. If he just stuck it
If
out, she
he's
would eventually come back or something. So I'm living in a house where technically still my stepfather is sleeping on a cot in the living room. My mother's girlfriend is sleeping in her room, and every night at dinner they are having violent confrontations.
wow.
It came to a head one night when he threw grape juice on her and they got up and literally got into a fight, and one of them even tried to stab the other with a salad fork. So the police came out and basically said,
Had
"Listen, dude,
well, this
please
is
leave."
yeah. As a point of order, had you already had because I just want to know, I just want to make sure that dinner hadn't started yet, because if it had, she should have used the main fork.
Oh, no, dinner had not started yet. So
Okay, so the
yeah.
salad fork is the appropriate tool to stab someone through the heart if dinner has not perfect. Good. Well, she had good manners.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
So
impeccable, of course.
okay, so the police come
Now,
and
at this time, they could not
yeah.
force him to leave, actually,
Well,
because they
they
were
were married,
married.
right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if the laws are different now, but at the time, they were incapable of forcing him to.
they're not different now.
Oh, really?
Well,
Wow.
I mean, with some exceptions, it depends on who did. It depends a little bit on who did the stabbing with what implement, and there can be some circumstances where you can force them to.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's rare because presumably the house is in both their names, or the apartment is
Well,
in both their names.
the
Yada
house
yada. If
was
it's a
actually
joint bank
still in
account,
my
yada yada.
grandfather's name. He still owned it.
Yeah, well, then you have an even bigger problem because you still have it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so but they couldn't get him out, or they did get him out? I'm sorry, I got
Well,
confused.
they couldn't force him to leave. They basically begged him to leave. They said, "Listen, man, you've got a kid here." They said, in fact, one of them finally appealed to his sense of, his personal sense of masculinity and said, "Dude, do you want to leave with dignity, or do you want to leave, kind of like a little bitch with in cuffs eventually? Like, how do you want to do this?"
Or with a salad fork sticking out of your forehead,
Yeah,
because quite
exactly.
frankly, it's like you look a little stupid going down to the ER and the salad fork is embedded, like, and you're sitting there and walking around with a thing going like this. I wonder if anybody notices.
I'm the
Um,
dinner unicorn.
Jesus. Oh,
uh, so that was a very rough transitional period, as you can imagine. Yeah.
and then what? Once the two of them were together, how did things improve at all? How was this woman?
Briefly things improved. There was kind of this moment of reprieve, and she seemed very cool. Um, and until she started getting very drunk and very violent.
Mm,
This woman was, first of all, she was related to some big money. While she didn't get any access to that money, she was related to big money.
hmm.
Her, um, her, her sister was married to the producer that ripped off Queen. To give you an idea, yes, the band Queen. And what's so funny is they have a song where they specifically tear him apart and sing about what a piece of shit he is. But the whole family's still so very proud that they have someone in the family that produced for Queen. They don't care.
Yeah, even if it was, yeah, yeah, the guy who like tried to steal from Queen and who's a villain and all this other, everyone hates him. He's in our family. We
Yeah,
know we're just. It's how many degrees of separation you are from. Okay, wow.
yeah. Well, part of this woman's problem, I can tell right now, looking back at the time, it didn't matter to me what her problem was. It was just, it was what it was. But looking back, part of the problem is that her mother really raised these girls to gold dig, to try and find that was their entire personality. You find yourself a husband who is wealthy and has clout to bring to the family, and you marry him. And this girl was a lesbian, and she tried very hard to carry the family, you know, um, I guess whatever you would call it, pull the family line. And I'm sure it screwed her up, but it turned her into, if you took all of the worst stereotypes you can think of a drunk, violent Italian woman and a drunk, violent Italian man, and you put them into a single human being, that was her.
Wow. And I'm sure the whole time, she's a sweetheart and you're out raping puppies.
Well,
Uh,
funny enough, she actually accused me of raping our dog.
oh my God!
She
No,
got drunk
please tell me
and
that
actually accused me. She can't. I was okay.
no, she
Kids,
did not. She
kids
did
camp
not.
outside, right? So we had a nice, huge backyard with kind of a naturey, area of the backyard with fruit trees and dirt and stuff like that. So I set up my sleeping bag, and the dog's out there, and we're having a night under the stars. I think I even had like a little, it's the 90s, so a little boombox radio playing some music. And the next thing I know, I'm getting kicked in the ribs, and she's calling me a sick fuck. And my mother eventually comes out, what the hell's going on? She's accusing me of trying to rape the dog.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, with all this, it's. I think it's kind of a miracle that you turned out norm. With all this, it's kind of a miracle you turned out almost normal. But with all this, it's kind of a miracle that you turned out as close to normal as you kind of almost did.
Fair enough.
Uh,
It's kind of true. It's kind of true.
all
Well,
right,
one bright
so
spot in all this, at least up until I was 8, my grandmother died when I was 8. She was one of the huge bright spots in my life. Um, she was like about as wholesome as you can possibly think, and cancer took her, and it was very sad. Um, But interestingly enough, my grandmother has a plaque at the LA Zoo. She donated a lot of money to the project, restoring, condors in California and stuff like that.
Let's not talk about accusations of you raping puppies and your grandmother having a plaque at the zoo, and let's try to
Oh.
keep all these things in kind of. So, oh, gee, well, hold on. Email, YouTube, you have been demonetized for a week and a half. What? Okay.
Yeah.
Um. Okay. This is good. This is that's okay. This was not the direction I had wanted to.
Well, I
Okay.
was I was very pacifistic. One of the things is I had always been the largest, person in my friend group. By the time
Mhm.
I was, to give you an idea, by the time I was 13, I had a size 13 shoe.
Jesus.
When I was 8 years old, I literally had a men's 8 shoe size. I donated at 8 years old my old shoes to the neighbor, and it was the father that ended up wearing them.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So
So
you
so
know,
I had learned restraint from a very young age because I didn't want to hurt anybody, and if I had exerted, my full strength with any of my friends, I would have hurt them very badly.
well, now that's yeah, that's I mentioned earlier. I'd done some martial arts and stuff like that, and it's sort of one of the things you learn. The more you know how to fight, the less you, in general, the less you want to, because the more you realize you're going to hurt somebody.
Mhm.
So, did you get into many fights? How did what kind of trouble did you get into with that?
Well, during this time, I wasn't getting into too many fights. It wasn't until a little later, when I got into high school, and she was still around at the time. I got into high school, and my first real fight started to happen. And they were never for myself. It was always I. I kind of collected big fucking surprise with the outcasts, the weirdos, the geeks, and the kind of losers. But I was big. I
Oh,
wore a bunch.
thanks. I'll try not to take that personally, but please continue.
But I was big and I wore a bunch of leather, so they usually came to me for um to solve their problems, not just physical, emotional ones too, but their physical problems. So I got into a lot of fight. In fact, one of my friends, his name was Jatish, I believe. He had a hormone problem, and he didn't produce growth hormone properly, and he was this very skinny tiny little Indian kid, and his dad looked exactly like Saddam Hussein, interestingly enough. um but he was one of the funniest, most witty, he had a sharp tongue, but he had no physical ability. So when he pissed
Hmm.
off the wrong people, it was me he came to hide behind.
You're basically a human shield at this point.
I was basically a human shield. And I was raised in a very Christian. My mother is incredibly Christian. Um and it's funny because at this point in time, I was, of course, very Christian because I was raised very Christian, but I was always rather kind of, I had a strong sense of empathy, and I kind of I got to know people. A lot of people came to me with their problems. I got to know people really well, and both my mother and this sort of innate ability, you might call it, convinced me that I had a biblical gift. I was convinced.
Hmm.
I was convinced I had a biblical gift. I could tell people things, about themselves that they didn't necessarily, or they knew, but they didn't necessarily know. I
Yep.
could
Yep.
tell, I could predict people's behavior. I could tell, in so long you're going to be doing this, this, and this. And it's not because I had any predictive power. It was just simply, humans are not that unpredictable once you understand behavior, and
Yeah.
we're always subconsciously picking up on clues and cues and social little things, and some of us are better at it than others. But I was convinced that this was a biblical, godly gift. I think you had something similar that you had talked about, but yeah.
I did. It was a very similar one. It was a psychological one. I was essentially a healer of sorts, and I could, take people who had undergone significant traumas of one kind or another, and I could make them feel better, and I could heal them. I could get them. I could draw them out. And I could do a lot of sort of reasonably similar stuff. And I thought it wasn't me. It was Jesus,
Right.
and I was just his vessel.
Of
And
course. Of course.
yeah, no, so
But my mother
Jesus.
really, I mean, she really convinced me. She helped, like when she saw this thing, oh, you've got a gift. You've got a gift. You should be a preacher. You should be a pastor, That was
Same here. Jesus was inside me, and he
Mhm.
was thrusting to the people I probably shouldn't have phrased it quite that way.
Probably not.
All
Jesus
right.
thrusting inside you probably sounds a little
No, well, no,
too
it sounded fine when I said it. It's when you say it that it sounds dirty.
I don't know, it sounds pretty Catholic to me.
Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Hold on. Email. You've been demonetized for 3.5 months. What? I thought it was all right. I'm going to need to talk to Ansgar about vetting our guests. At any rate, um, okay. So, now what were you doing with art at this point? So you're a
Oh
big
yeah.
guy. Yeah.
So I'd always been into art, but in high school I really got into art, and the person who inspired me was my art teacher. She took a real interest in my artistic talent, and she actually set aside. She had like two free periods or whatever, like something like that, and she took one of these and she created a class for me to teach me advanced things that she was teaching the normal class, which was under the normal curriculum, but I'd already been through that and I excelled in ways that there was nothing she could teach me in that class. So she took a completely free a period that would normally be for like meetings or whatever, and she created a class for me. I went to class.
Hmm.
I was the only person in the classroom, and I learned about mediums and history of art, and it was I built like a portfolio. She was basically preparing me for art college, and I graduated at 16. Actually, I graduated 2 years early from high school.
Really?
Yeah. Um,
So,
Go ahead.
well, no, I would not to change topics. So your mother was Christian and had
Mhm.
sort of, and so you at this point you graduate, you've got um you're early, so clearly you're intelligent. You hide it well, but clearly you're intelligent, and you're talented at art, and you graduate, and your mom's got you convinced of this Christianity. How did her Christianity influence her and the sort of the way she looked at the world?
Well, for one, she was.
Well, aside what, and let me just, I've read, I haven't read all the Bible,
Mhm.
but I didn't see anything in there about um, if thine husband approaches, thou shalt stab him with the salad fork. So we'll take that piece out of it and say, excluding that, I
Right.
assume she had religious. Was she conservative? Was she? But the salad fork thing aside, strikes me as not as
She
conservative.
was really. It's hard to peg exactly what she was. I would say that in many ways she's very conservative. In
Mhm.
other ways, she's rather liberal. For instance, she is very, very Christian, but she wants a secular government. Like I think that has a lot to do with the cultural influence on her. She doesn't want religious laws, but she still thinks everyone should be religious, you know. Um she certainly thinks that anyone who isn't religious is going to hell. And it's got to be her brand of Christianity. Believe I was raised Lutheran was the religion of the family, if I remember right. But she I didn't find out until I was in high school and started playing Dungeons and Dragons at a black friend's house that she was a racist. I found that out when she introduced me to the term porch monkey. Oddly enough, yeah, it was like it's weird. It's like my mother was hiding all of her craziest crazy until I was in high school. Like,
Which, which, given how much of the story you've told us thus far, that's a statement. Holy shit. Okay, please
yeah,
continue.
yeah.
Sorry.
Imagine being raised by like what you think is like the hippie mom. Because she's always talking about how secularism is so important, and she's always, even though she's Christian, and she's always
Uh,
letting you see things like nature documentaries and talking about how important environmentalism is. And then you're driving, you're in a car on your way to a friend's house, and she goes, "Oh my God, look at all the porch monkeys."
oh my
She
God.
actually said that. And I looked over and went, "Mom." She says, "Well, what? It's true." I was blown away. I had no idea. She had been hiding this for years of my life. An entire personality I didn't know existed.
Now,
Uh,
there's a couple of different avenues to take with this. I will point out this doesn't sound entirely unlike your biological father.
no, no, not
Um,
at all. Not at all unlike
so,
it.
but you ended up. Why do you think you ended up so different?
She didn't raise me with it. She didn't expose me to it, which is very strange. I mean, I think in general, I was also. We have to remember that I was born in 1980, so I was raised through the 80s. And you look
Yeah.
at what the media was like in the 80s, for kids, and it was all very much, we are the world, we are the children, let's hold hands, every color is, we're all the same, like that was in every Saturday morning cartoon. Like, even
Yep.
look at the most popular cartoons. We're gonna take a person, like a teenager, and turn them into a hero. And there's one from this country, and there's one from that country, and it's always a kid from
Yeah. Yeah.
every
Yeah. Yeah.
freaking country of the world. I grew up with Captain Planet, for fuck's sake. So I think that had a lot to do with it. I think that my mother kind of keeping it under wraps had a lot to do with it. Um, I think being checked out of my family in a lot of ways because of abuse had a lot to do with
Mm,
it. Um, and I mean, uh, my mother's girlfriend at this time was also being like incredibly physically abusive. I mean, breaking instruments over my head, physically abusive. So I was pretty
Jesus.
checked out of my family at this point. Um, uh, in fact, she didn't actually leave this woman. She didn't leave her until she embarrassed her in front of her coworkers. Her coworkers were over for I believe it was a New Year's Eve party. Um, and she got drunk and cursed at people, hit me with an instrument. The police had to come out. Broke a banjo over my head this time. She had already broken a guitar over my head. This time she broke a banjo over my head. Yeah, banjo.
Oh, Jesus.
That's somehow symbolic of my family.
Wow. Oh, okay. So, Ansgar, all I can say is at least it wasn't cutlery.
At least it
Um,
wasn't cutlery. Yeah.
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 Yeah, all joking aside, I mean that's I think I think a lot of people when they go through traumatic experiences, they think, well, this is just life, and then they go out and they see other people, some people who have it worse, and some people who
Hmm.
have it significantly better, and they start to say, wow, this not all families are like this. So I don't know. I'd be a little curious to find out, sort of how and when you started to realize that maybe this wasn't normal. It sounds like you maybe had some idea earlier, and you obviously had friends, but I don't know whether we could either go
I
there and
can't.
cover
I
that out.
couldn't tell you. I didn't
Yep.
know it was abnormal because everyone on my block had some kind of fucked up thing going on. You know, there were the crazy hippie neighbors that were, you know, very misogynistic and abusive to the mother of the family. Then there
Mhm.
was my other neighbors who were Mormon, who the girls underwent extreme sexual abuse and ended up in the system. Then there
Mm.
was my other neighbors who were a Filipino crazy Christian whose mother chased them around with heavy wooden sandals, trying to strike them in the head. So like this kind of crap was all over the place. I didn't know anyone who didn't have some kind of a fucked up parent. So I didn't know this was abnormal until I was probably out of the house.
Well, so you turned 16.
Hmm.
You have graduated high school 2 years early.
Yeah.
Is that what? How did you get out of the? Is that how you got out of the house? What happened after that?
Sort of. So I, because of my great, amazing art teacher, who, by the way, was in her 60s and looked 25. Um, just one of the most amazing ladies too. She had all of this youthful, sweet energy. She was just kind, like kindness radiated from her.
Hold on. You said she looked 25. So I just for research do you have her name and number? I'm just
I do
research. I just
not.
wanna. I gotta. I want to get the story right. I want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
chat. Does
Long
my wife
black
watch this stream?
long black dreads down to her knees, always wearing like those layered skirts where it's like, you know, five different colors of layered skirts. And yeah.
Okay, that you don't need to describe that. Every art teacher in the 80s, that
Yes,
was
you are
it
so
everywhere.
right.
That was my art teacher, and I grew up in a very different environment. You just described my art teacher. Uh, but you described both. I had an art teacher named Susan. You described her, and you described Peter, the other art teacher. Both those dresses. But at any rate, please continue.
Yes, yes. So, I was actually accepted and got a partial scholarship. Well, actually, it was actually a full scholarship, but it didn't cover room and board.
Mm.
So I still had to pay for like dormitory or you know whatever. But I had other than that, I had a free ride at a one of the most prestigious colleges in the country, which is actually up in San Francisco. And so I talked to my grandfather, who was fairly well to do. I mean, he owned two properties, and one of them was, you know, a two-story house in the wealthy part of Covina. Um, yeah, yeah, he did well for himself. Um, and he agreed to help me through college. Now, my mother, I can only imagine what her motive might have been. And so it has to be one of two things or a little bit of both. Either she wanted to keep me financially dependent on her,
Mhm.
or she was trying to make sure that I didn't drain any of her you know, potential uh what do you call that,
Inheritance.
inheritance. Exactly. She convinced my grandfather that I was attempting to rip him off, that this was a
Oh my
scam.
God.
And so he told me that he didn't to come out and say that he believed her, but it was too much family drama for him. He didn't want any part of it. And so he just sort of pulled out and didn't want to have anything to do with it. Um, she then told
If you
me,
don't, if you don't
go
mind
ahead,
my asking, do you think it was jealousy?
maybe, could have been. I mean,
I mean, it looks like you're going to be successful. It looks like you're going to do something. You graduated 2 years early,
mhm,
and the only thing now in the way that is the money. That's the only thing that's
yeah,
stopping you from doing it. And if you go out and you make a success, what does that say about her? It's just I'm thinking, just sort of thinking
possible.
aloud. I was wondering if it was
I mean, she had a
just jealousy.
baby. She had
Didn't
a
want
baby
you to,
at 18 and had to fight her way into middle management, so it wouldn't surprise me.
yeah.
No, and she very much enjoyed her role as the matriarch of the family at this, being the head of the
Uh,
family.
and she loses that if you're gone.
Oh yeah, especially if I become successful.
Yep. Well, and then
Um,
for someone who seems to abhor embarrassment,
Mhm.
What happens if you are successful and all of a sudden you start making some money and then you bring your fancy friends back to the house?
There's that
You know,
too.
you bring fancy rich friends back with you, people who are educated, and they see where you grew up, and that just a thought.
Yeah,
But
no, that's a good thought. Very good thought. It was certainly my mother's a blind spot, so I don't always anticipate or interpret her actions as well as others looking outside looking in might.
of course,
Either way, though, I couldn't go to college. And I had to readjust my plans. And my mother told me, oh, "Okay, you've graduated a few months ago. You've got 2 months to get a job or get out."
gee, oh, so okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, no, it's just we were talking on our previous show about things that frustrate and anger me, and I find it unfortunate. I don't know where you've settled with it, but I care about you a lot. I don't.
Thank you.
We're not live, right? No.
Yeah, we
Well,
are.
first of all,
Yeah.
let's okay. That was just something I say to yeah. Now, in all seriousness, I do, and it's kind of tough to hear that because and people in the show, they had asked earlier, well, gee, you're really smart. Obviously, you went to college. There's no, did you? And you're a really smart guy. And to see that you had something where it was paid for, and you had, and not a lot of people could do that. I didn't graduate 2 years early. And to see that, instead it's like, well, no, get a job or get out. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I got a job lined up. Um, and she said to me, her exact I can't remember her exact words, but she had just started to date a new woman. But well, we can get into that later. But she told me that she hadn't actually expected me to be able to get a job in that time. That she already had contractors coming over to remodel my room, and that I needed to get out anyway.
So, what plans did you have? Where were you gonna go?
I was homeless for 2 years almost. I
You,
lived on the streets.
so no house. Yeah, you've got a mom,
Hmm.
but you're not welcome. She's remodeled your room, and you are living on the streets for almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Every once in a while, I'd have a friend that would give me a couch to sleep on for a week or two. But
Yeah.
and let me tell you something. It is not exactly easy to get a job when you don't have an address. You know.
So what would a typical day or night be like for you at that time? At
Typically,
16, 16 and a half.
typically, what I would do is I would cruise around the phone booths, searching to see if there was enough change. And then I would go to, at this time they had, like, I think it was like the 33 cent hamburgers at McDonald's on Wednesdays. And I would go Wednesday and I would buy just an absolute ton of hamburgers, and they would have to last me the week. I would share some with some of my other homeless friends that I had made. Most nights I would go to the Game Zone, which was it was a place that had, well, many of my friends hung out from before I was homeless. Because we played things like Dungeons and Dragons. This was a place that had room in the back to do that. And so I could get something like go to AM/PM and buy a drink that you can refill over and over and over, basically for nothing. And I would hang out at the Game Zone and talk to people and stuff like that. And then night was looking for someplace warm to sleep, um, warm and comfortable if possible. Sometimes that was with a friend. Sometimes that was I had one guy that let me sleep in the back of his pickup truck a couple times. Just wherever I could. Eventually, I learned about a place called Job Corps, and that was my path out. They would teach you job skills, and they would put you up. They would give you a place to live. The problem was, though, that because I was underage, I needed my mother's permission. Um,
Oh,
yeah. Now, this is a part of the story that I'm not particularly proud of, but I had no choice. She wouldn't help me out. She wouldn't sign anything. So I had to convince them that I, lived on my own and stuff like that. Now, Job Corps at the time was run by some rather conservative Christians. The only way they basically kind of twisted my arm into basically writing a statement saying, look at what a degenerate my mother is. She's a homosexual. This is why I'm out on my own. And that was really the only way. And I still feel shitty for this, that I had to leverage that of all things, to get into Job Corps. And I'll never forget having to sign that statement. It was just, it felt so dirty, but it was like homeless maybe for the rest of my life, or bed, 3 square meals, and some education, you know. And they even had artistic programs, and I got into the desktop publishing program. That's where they sent me. um and uh Job Corps is its own interesting story. Definitely its own interesting story. um any questions before we move on to that, though?
Um, no, no. I think that speaks for itself. I'm gonna let that one go.
uh, so
Uh, so
uh,
Job Corps.
so Job Corps. So I went to my mother's house after I got into Job Corps to pick up my things. Turns out that she had pretty much thrown away all of them. um Only the things that I had stored at some friend's house survived. So I got the things from my friend's house, and I moved in to Job Corps. It was like a dorm situation. You shared a room with a bunch of other people. Started some education. Eventually, I got into what was the honor dorm, which was only 18-year-olds. Got to 18 and older got to live there. And it was, you had to be, of good behavior, and all that kind of thing. But this was a very Christian organization, and they brought in a new Christian director. Now, at this point, I've been in Job Corps for about a year, and I'm really deep into my education. In fact, this was shortly after 9/11, actually. In fact, I was in class when all that happened. But the they bring in this new director, and he is very conservative, like, uh what is that? It's Southern Baptist,
Oh Jesus, yeah.
Christian. Yeah, a black
Yeah.
Southern Baptist. And so the first thing he decides is that here in the honor dorm, all 18-year-olds, the porn has to go, all of it.
Excuse what? Excuse me.
The porn. They're going to
Okay, okay.
confiscate the
Oh no,
porn.
no, no, no. I was okay with you nearly getting stabbed, you getting beat with a banjo, you got kicked out of your house, you didn't get an education, but you couldn't keep the porn.
Oh,
No,
it's
please,
so
Ansgar.
much
The
worse.
humanity. The humanity.
So much
Oh no,
worse
just
than you
okay,
think.
just okay, okay, okay. Just I don't know if I want to
So,
continue.
in this honor dorm, there are
Mhm.
some characters that to take note of. One of them is, first of all, my Satanist friend, with his
It's-
nails sharpened into claws and painted black.
yeah.
Really interesting character. Another one is a guy that we call Dim, because he wasn't very bright, but he was a good guy.
Hmm.
The other was my friend Jeremiah, who was just the sweetest little gay boy. I mean, he was a big guy, but he was just, his demeanor was very small, very unassuming, very sweet. He was going to school to be a nurse, but God, he was just an adorable, wonderful human being, but very
Yep.
soft, very very soft. And then there were the four guys who were hard line Christian from, I believe, South Africa. And you know how religious, well, let's face it, our religious institutions here in America have hit Africa hard. with
Yes.
their doctrine. So that's kind of where the culture they came from. And when the way they decided to confiscate the porn was not privately, was not,
Oh
intimately in
Jesus.
any way. They literally brought in a trash can and just started going into people's rooms and then dragging the open trash can from room to room. Well,
Oh Jesus.
these four South Africans see all this gay porn in the trash can. So they decided they're going to go hunt whoever's responsible because they can't have, a fag, so to speak, on their
Yep.
floor. Um, and it's getting very, very clear that they're zeroing in on who this person is, and they're going to beat the ever loving shit out of them. So I released a rumor that it was me, that it was my pornography. I told a few people who I knew would tell and tell and tell. And sure enough, in the middle of the night, they drug me out of my room into the bathroom and beat the ever loving shit out of me. The absolute ever loving shit. So, first of all, my heart goes out to anybody who has suffered an attack like that. I do know what it's like, even though I'm bisexual. I didn't even know at the time that I was bisexual. I am bisexual, but I didn't even know that at the time. But that is, even though I knew it was coming, it was fucking terrifying. In fact, it might have been more terrifying because I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when. Um, Nothing ever happened to them. I couldn't prove it was them, and no one was certainly going to talk at the time because they were, violent, and who wanted to end up like me, you know. Um,
Did they ever
and
find out whose it was?
no, no, they just assumed it was mine. They let it go at that point. They figured they had, got the guy responsible, and they wanted me out of the dorm, but I wasn't going anywhere. Had I stayed much longer, I probably would have continued, but other things came to a head. I got into some trouble with the school itself. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened?
Well, me and the director crossed swords, so to speak, and not in the fun spanky way.
Yeah, well, I was about to
Uh,
say, considering the topic we were just on, I'm not sure that crossing swords was the good. Okay,
yeah.
so we got Jesus and crossing swords, and this has been a unusually homoerotic. No, this is about the usual level of homoeroticism in our shows. Okay,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah. It's pretty close to normal.
yeah, it's pretty close. It is pretty average for our show. If this is a first time watching, this is about on par.
So so in typical conservative Christian rhetoric, he decides that things like computers and video games and TVs and even radios are a distraction, and that all surfaces are supposed to be used for homework and study. Even though we have students that are literally going to school for things like computer engineering, and their computers are part of their homework. No, it all has to go, all of it. So I organized a sit-in protest, and
Oh, for fuck's sake!
I really did. And the
I'm going to have a problem here because if you end up being known as the good guy on the show, yeah, well, Nick seems like a nice guy, but when was the last time he took a beating for someone? When was the last time Nick did a protest for dudes? I'm not going to be able to compete with this shit. I'm really not. This was a very bad idea. I don't know what idiot decided to interview you. He should be dragged out into, he should be
I
stabbed with a
believe it
salad
was
fork. All right.
yours. Yeah, I believe this was your
Yeah.
idea. Yeah, but you should talk to your
Thank you
co-host
for
just in
reminding
case.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leave it to you to point out who's, all right, please. Yeah, okay. You're the guest. I have to pretend I respect you. Please continue. Actually, at this point, I can't even joke about that. It's like there's no human being who could sit there and say, that Ansgar, he's just such a fucking ass. Yeah, all right. All right. Wait,
So
wait, wait, way to make the host look like a schmuck. Please continue. You decided to do a sit-in protest
they
over
actually
the
call the
yeah.
police, put me in cuffs, and take me away. I get arrested, taken off the property. But I'm still a student there, so eventually I come back.
He must have loved that. He's like, good, we got rid of the. He's a student here. Shit.
Yeah, yeah. So what ended up happening was they bring me into a meeting. All the big wigs are there, and the only one
Yep.
person that's on my side is the dean. Basically, she serves the purpose of like the dean of this establishment. That's basically what she does. And
Mm.
she's literally singing Pink Floyd's The Wall on the way to this meeting. So I knew I had one ally, you know. Uh, uh, yeah, that was freaking fantastic. So we get to the I get into the meeting, and basically what's offered to me is a list of the demands that I've made, that they will sign a paper um that they promised to, I think it was for something like 10 years, give in to these demands of letting the students have what they want, but I have to give up my education and leave Job Corps willingly. Those are my
Thus, meaning
choices.
you have no legal recourse at that point. That's the as soon as you sign that, you're done.
Right. So I can either stay and finish my education or leave and make sure all the other students are treated like human fucking beings. So I signed the paper, left. I didn't finish my education, and I was homeless again. I was homeless for about. This is, by the way, I don't want to call anyone out, but when someone says that, me saying that protesting, telling me that protesting is a choice that came from a position of privilege, no, no, no. I ended up homeless and couldn't finish my education because I was willing to do what I felt was right. So I ended up on the streets for about 3 months, I believe, until I got a friend helped me get a job with a security company.
Hmm.
And for a while, I lived in different hotels until I finally got
Hmm.
myself into an apartment. Um, There's some wild security stories too. Those,
I'll
ooh
bet we could
man,
do a whole show. We'll do a show on, but no, that would be probably the Ansgar After Dark, but that would be the After
oh my
Dark with
god.
security at a
Yeah, I
hotel.
worked. To give you an idea, I worked at this hospital. It was the only like state funded, not private emergency room. So anytime someone didn't have insurance, so
Yep.
in graveyard shift, the only one in the middle of Hollywood.
Oh Jesus. Oh boy, I'll bet you've got some stories.
Yeah, oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Uh,
I gotta share one good one. One good one.
please.
Lady comes in. She is telling the doctors, she's got her new husband with her, and she's telling the doctors that a doctor has forced an abortion on. Okay, so they run all
Mhm.
the tests and they do all the thing, and the nurse comes to her and says, "Listen, we've run everything. We do not see any evidence that you were ever pregnant. We don't know what you're talking about." She flips out, tries to strike a nurse. I mean, she goes ballistic. So we have to strap her down. She's becoming violent, and they give her a sedative. And she's like, she's freaking out, and she's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What's taking over? You're just waiting for me to die." And she looks at her husband and says, "Help, help, call Johnny Cochran." And like in her mind, Johnny Cochran's the superhero that's going to come save her when someone's trying to
Oh,
kill her. And the entire emergency
oh.
room could not help but stop and laugh.
Oh, I'm sure that one. I'm sure that kind of good.
There were patients who were moaning in pain who stopped, sat up, and laughed. Because the idea of Johnny Cochran being the person that you call out to when you believe someone is trying to kill you is just the most absurd. Oh, oh, it was beautiful. But anyways, a lot of stories from security. We could be here all night, but that was just one of the most bizarre of them. Um, so this leads me though eventually to living across the street from who's now my wife. I moved in with a friend. I had lost my security job. Um and I was between jobs. I was looking for something else, and I was staying with a friend.
Hmm.
And a job came up. She was the primary worker. They're both Mormon. She was the primary worker in the home, the primary breadwinner, and he had been out of work for a long, long time. And he got a temporary job with a friend working at a construction site, so they need someone to watch the kids. I was free. Okay, I'm gonna go watch the kids. Well, it was horrible. It was
Really?
I had never seen kids being kept in such a horrible condition. Um and he's supposed to be the one home with the kids. I mean, the literally calf high filth in their room. Mold growing in the high chair. It was horrible. So I cleaned the house, cleaned up the kids, you know, uh, fed the kids, did what, someone taking care of kids is supposed to do. Eventually he stopped working at the job and said, if you want to you're doing such a good job with the kids, if you want to continue working for us, you can. Like, okay, fine. I need the money and I'd rather see these kids get taken care of well, you know? And I certainly had seen from my past what happens when kids go into the system, so I didn't think that was any better for them to call, Child Protective Services. It was
Yeah.
better off just having someone in their life that would take care of them. Well,
Yeah.
eventually he stopped paying, and I just kept working because I wasn't going to let them go back to what they were, especially when I saw the way he was taking care of them. It was literally go into your room, don't come out, and then that's what he told them, and then he would go into his room and watch porn and play video games all day. That was taking care of
Oh.
the kids. I mean, it was so bad that the little girl had learned to change her own diaper, or at least attempted to.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, so eventually she divorced him, or at least initiated divorce, and there's a lot going on. There was domestic abuse going on I didn't necessarily know about, and it was real ugly. It was gross. In fact, my first clue that there was some domestic abuse going on was when I was watching The Boys. The little one tried to stick his finger up the butt of the older one while they were wrestling. I said, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And he looked at me and said, "Daddy." I'm like, "No, no, you can't do that." So I told her, and it wasn't long after that she was already wanting to, but it wasn't long after that. But anyways, um,
Yeah.
so I stayed on for a while. I actually helped kind of get her out of Mormonism by asking questions because we weren't even dating yet, and she was taking me into the temple because she wanted to try and,
Oh, there's a plan. Given
oh,
your history, there's a plan. Bring you to the temple. They're gonna be having you sign documents. We will deconvert if you never go within 1,000 yards of the temple ever again.
exactly. And so I'm just sitting there, and I'm very pro LGBT at this point. My mother was lesbian. I've worked. I've certainly spent some time helping out at the LGBT centers and things like that, here and
Wait,
there.
wait, 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 wait. You were the babysitter ostensibly.
Yes.
So Crowley was dating the babysitter.
Not yet, but yeah, she dated the babysitter. Yeah.
She dated the babysitter. Okay, okay. Just wanted to get that. Okay, good, good, good. Sorry. Okay, please continue. This is fascinating.
So she starts taking me to the temple and bringing me around some of her Mormon friends, and I'm just asking questions, and I'm just asking questions, and I'm just
I'm
asking
just asking
questions.
questions, says every anti-theist on the fucking planet.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, especially when we got into the magic underwear, and she's like telling me, "Oh, but I get, I saw this letter where they say, so and so wasn't wearing some, like, so it's a chain letter." And she said, "Well, let me get back
Not
to you
this
on
letter.
that."
This letter is not a chain letter. The others are chain letters,
Right.
but this one's really a Nigerian prince.
Right, right. So she
Yeah.
goes,
Okay.
let me get back to you on that one. So every time I had a question, she's like, "Let me get back to you on that one," and she couldn't get satisfactory answers from, her friends or anyone in the church. So she eventually left Mormonism, and it wasn't long after that we started, the two of us started dating, and it was really funny. I remember, she remembers this more clearly than I do, but apparently I told her, like, listen, I'm opinionated, I'm loudmouthed, I never shut up, here's all my flaws, and if you're okay with that, we can date. And she was like, oh, that was the most, after coming out of an abusive relationship, that was the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. um so yeah, we dated for some time. For the most part, their father wasn't, their birth father wasn't in their lives. He didn't come around at all. We got ourselves into a new house. Well, it wasn't new, it was falling the fuck apart. But some friends basically decided that they would let us rent to own, and so we got
Mhm.
into an actual house. It,
Nice.
like I said, was falling apart, but I had handyman skills. See, when
Yeah.
I worked with my my stepfather, who was an electrician, I learned general contracting skills. So I started kind of
It only
putting
costs
the,
you a permanent shoulder injury to do it, but yeah, okay.
yeah, no problem, and some, a few emotional scars, and other than that,
All came in handy. I'm
uh
sure I'm sure if he were around, he'd sit there and say, "See,
oh yeah, oh
yeah,
yeah.
uh,
That conservative mindset it just fries my
oh,
brain, man.
Jesus.
It's just, ugh. Oh
Did you do
well.
any more protest? Did you do any more protesting around this time, or
Not just yet.
okay?
We
Oh,
just
not
moved.
just yet, but you will. You will. You'll
Oh, I
get to it.
will.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. I was active in a lot of things. In fact, one of the things that kept me away from most churches was being so pro, LGBT. I was
Mhm.
I was very active in that kind of thing. I hadn't done any protests yet, but I hadn't really had a lot of reason to do so just yet. Uh, my wife says, "Yeah, I dated the nanny, the hot blonde nanny." Oh man, one of these days you have to hear her describe the first time she saw me. It's something out of like, really, that's how you see me? That's all. Well, my ego just inflated a little. So uh so we move into this place. It's a dump, but very soon we discover it is one of the most multicultural, wonderful neighborhoods. The only time in my life I ever never experienced racism once. Not once.
Was in the multicultural neighborhood.
Yeah. Now when I lived in places like Pasadena, it was very different. It was on one side of the track, you don't want to be white. On the other side, you don't want to be black. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the way it was. Racism was just there. It was ever present. Here, nothing. Like, it was, the Chinese guy owns the store. He's got, mostly Hispanics working for them, and they sell food and products from all over the world, and everyone celebrates each other's holidays, and you know what I mean? It was just one of those neighborhoods, and it was freaking amazing. I honestly wish we could go back and live there. I
So
do.
let me. How much racism were you subjected to growing up? Now
A
obviously,
ton.
some there was some. Yeah. So, would you mind talking about
Well,
that just a bit?
sure.
It's not. There aren't a lot of white people who've experienced any considerable amount of racism. It can happen, but it's not common, and I'm
Certainly not
just
common.
curious.
Well, we lived in a very segregated area. And
Mm,
it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was segregated necessarily by race, but certainly if you were of darker skin, you better look the culture, if that makes sense. You know what I
yep.
mean? You can't be dressed what would be perceived dressing black at the time, you know. But this led to a very interesting thing, that because of that separation, particularly classist separation, the anti-white sentiment everywhere outside of this tiny little bubble in that area was incredibly strong. And we're not talking about just the kids or something like that. One a moment now, I just want to make people understand that this is merely a moment that is representative of what it was like going to school. This is not just the one time I experienced racism. I was in school. This was junior high, I believe. I come out of the school and there are kids literally trying to steal my bike. They're trying to break the lock off. It was a group of black kids. They decide they're going to try and jump me for the key. So I tried to run back into the school. The staff saw what was going on. These are the actual people working at the school. Laughed, pushed, had the security guard push me outside and locked the door to allow the kids to beat on me right outside the door. Like, I'm leaning against the door. They know what's happening. They can hear it, and they are laughing. Um, and don't think that this was fueled entirely by they just wanted to steal somebody's bike. The racial epithets were enough to tell you why they were doing this. They knew whose bike it was, you know,
Oh,
and it was justified because they were stealing, a white boy's bike.
yeah.
The only reason they didn't get my bike is because there just happened to be construction work going on across the street, and a giant. Now this contrasts what was going on, which is interesting. It was a big old Mexican guy and a big old black guy with construction tools in hand came over and chased the kids off. So even though the area was intensely racist, these guys from wherever they were, all they saw was a kid getting beat up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they went back to the job site and called my mother and had her come and put my bike in the back of the station wagon and stuff like that. But that really is absolutely endemic of what it was like growing up. None of the schools that I went to were majority white. None of them. And there was literally a race based giant brawl at one of my schools where it was literally everybody of certain ethnicities grouped up and tried to beat the crap out of anybody that didn't look like them. This happened at one of my schools, and so this was it was, I don't know, it feels very alien to some white people to say that there's anti-white racist sentiment out there, but it really does happen. It exists.
It unfortunately it doesn't feel alien to many white people. The problem is most of the ones it doesn't feel alien to haven't actually experienced it.
It's
The
true.
the uh, the amount of oh my God, there's all this anti-right white racism from elitists, from people who live in a mansion and oh, this is one of the few stories where maybe you can, have a claim to that. But I think far more people claim it than I think could justify such a claim.
And I would call that, when things like school systems, when things like even the police in the area are slanted against you for your skin color, I would call that systemic racism. Now, it may not have gone all the way up to the state level, it may not have gone all the way up to the governor or the country, but it's certainly, if you lived in that area, the system itself was slanted against you. I can't tell you the number of times I got my ass beat and I was the one that ended up suspended, even though I was a pacifist.
Uh, well, and I think to be honest, in my mind, this also sort of informs for people who, and I've known a lot about this, know a lot of this about Ansgar for some time, but for people who don't know you, they see who you are on in time and the things that you care about and the things that sort of get you engaged. And when you talk about police as an occupying force, there aren't a lot of white people who talk about that or who have
True.
that perspective. And I think this is one of the interesting things. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview. But I think it also, for people who want to try to understand who you are and why you are the way you are on in time and just what you contribute. I think this is um, a huge part of it.
Yeah.
So uh, So you're in a house,
Yeah, we're
and
finally in the house.
it's a rent, or you're working towards paying it off,
Right,
and
it's rent to own. Um, it's basically you pay a certain amount of rent, and the deal was that any money that we put into the house fixing it would
mhm.
be counted as our rent as well. That all we had to do was keep receipts.
Okay, but since it you're not living there now, I assume, unfortunately, that something happened.
Well, before that, before we even get into that, our our middle son was diagnosed with cancer, acute lymphoblastic
Oh,
leukemia. And fortunately, he had a great prognosis, and he's done well. Just everybody, he's alive. He's alive. He survived. But at the time, it
thank.
was devastating, and we were already poor. And when it rains, it pours, so to speak. And here's the doctor saying that we have to keep absolute sterilization when he comes home, and he can't be near dirt. By the way, our yard was completely dirt. um he can't do this, he can't do that. And so we we had some
Well, and that's
amazing.
and that's that's for a rich family. That's a
Mhm.
burden. That's not easy to do, even if you can pay for people to clean and to do. That's still not easy to do. And there are families that are reasonably well off who have that problem and have a very hard time meeting those goals or meeting those requirements.
Yeah, so a bunch of really cool friends, some of them we were playing World of Warcraft at the time. Some of them were our guildies on World of Warcraft. They came together and bought us things like gas cards for the car because it was constant trips into the hospital, and that was expensive. They bought us a one of those air filters to that we put in his room, obviously. Cleaning supplies, just all the things that we needed. There was very little financial burden on us, thankfully, because of that. So really wonderful people. Um, and shortly after that, my grandfather died, and this is where things get a little dark again. When he died, it was expected that certain things were supposed to go to me. One of which was his house. Now everything was left in my mother's name. She
Oh boy.
decided that I could not afford such a nice house. Told me that she might buy me a nice trailer somewhere, fixed it up, let it sit empty for years, and then sold it. But did me the favor of giving me his car, the pinball machine, his antique pinball machine that was one of the things that he and I shared a love of, and the antique coin collection, but only after removing the most wealthy, the most valuable coins.
Most valuable coins.
Um, so yeah, and that was we're talking a 4-bedroom, 2-story house that could have elevated my entire family out of the shit that we were in, and just gone because she was greedy. So after that, I cut off contact with my mother.
I'm going to interrupt you. That's not greed, Ansgar. It would have been greed if she was living in the house.
She sold it. She wanted the money.
After years, she sold it.
Hmm. Well, see, after
Yeah,
putting all that money in it, she couldn't let us live there because we would damage the value. She'd just put in things like new
yeah,
carpet, which are necessary to sell the house at
yeah.
full market value.
Yep.
So so eventually our friends decided that they wanted to sell the house, and there were no legal protections. So we had to get out. Period. End of story.
So these are okay. These are the friends you're living at the. You're living at the. You're working. You're putting money into the house, and they decide they're going to sell it, despite the fact that you are rent to own on the house,
Hmm.
ostensibly, but without 20 dozen legal contracts.
Well, no, no, no. At the time, rent to own in California had no legal protections, no matter
Oh
what you
Jesus.
signed.
Oh Jesus. No matter what you. Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, real cute. So, in fact, at one point I called and said, "Listen, we are pre-approved for a home loan. Just give us time to get money together. Let's negotiate. What do you want for the property?" And he said, "Okay, you know what? Ignore the order that we sent to vacate the premises. Let me talk to my wife. We will work something out." 6 days later, we find a sheriff's notice on the door. So it was just a lie. It was just something to, you know, get me, get us to not, you
Yeah.
know, continue contacting them and trying to figure something out. So we had to basically drop our entire savings, everything, most of our the things that we own, and the only place that we could afford to move, because this was right after the bubble burst. And what people don't understand about the bubble burst is it was way more difficult on renters than anyone else. And the reason for that is you get all these people out of their homes, suddenly the competition for renting goes way up.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. So the only
No one,
place
no
that
one
we
can
could
buy anymore.
afford
Yep.
to rent was up in the high desert in a place called Lancaster, which we didn't know anything about. So oh yeah, let's not forget you asked me about protesting before all this
Well, I
happened.
asked you about protesting, and then one other thing that I want to, but we're going to start to run up on the time limit. But the other, so there's the protesting, because I was curious if you did any other protesting.
Mhm.
My suspicion is going to be
Yes.
that's going to be a big yes. That's going to be I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's a big yes. But I also had somebody had told me, and I don't remember if it was you. Somebody had told me about that there was some insane trip, and I figure since bringing a little
Oh
levity, if
yeah.
there's an insane trip to something, and it would I to Growly's grandmother's or something like that. So I don't know what that is, but I'd like to hear. So we are going to start to run up on time a little bit soon, because I have some kids that I don't want to be neglecting. But so let's do either let's start with, and let's see where we go for time. But let's start with the trip, and or you protesting and making other people's lives miserable, which normally I would contest, but it sounds like in most cases these were religious people, so I'm okay
Yeah.
with it.
So the protesting was easy. It's a short story. In this time, California passed Prop 8, and what that was we had briefly legalized same-sex marriage, and
Hmm.
Prop 8 was a proposition that not only re-legalized it, but also made any marriage done anywhere else in the country where it was legal, the moment you step foot in California, your marriage
It's
was
no
null
longer
and
recognized.
void.
Yep.
Yes. And so I and the big church organization that sponsored all of this was the Mormon Church. So I spent some time protesting, and there may have been an arrest, and there
I'm okay. Okay, listen, dude. When you filled out the paperwork for in time, I don't recall you listing. Just how many times have you been arrested?
twice, both for protesting.
I'm not entirely sure I believe that. How many times do you plan on getting arrested this point going forward?
Depends on what kind of shitty laws get passed wherever I'm moving.
Okay, so I can assume at least 5 or 6 more times. This is good. This is great. This is
Yeah.
great. I didn't know that. By the way, I was actually for Prop 8, but I appreciated the protesters. So
You were
just
for
because
Prop 8?
I was for Prop 8, but the reason I was for Prop 8 was because ostensibly the people who a lot of liberals supported it, but they supported it because they felt it was unconstitutional, and they knew that if it got passed, it would go to a constitutional, which is in fact what
What
happened.
happened? Yes.
Yes, and a lot of liberals were for passing it, which is not to say. I mean, that's hey, I was completely in lockstep with protesters and people against it, but I
That
supported
makes
it
sense. It
because
was a tactical move.
it was a tactical move, knowing that if it goes to the Supreme Court and that was one reason why a lot of liberals were also for because that specific amendment that got tacked on saying, oh, if you have a legal marriage elsewhere and bring it here, it's illegal. Like, oh yeah, add that, because there's no way the Supreme Court is going to let that fly.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, oh, you can make this law worse, please.
See,
But
this shows you
yeah.
the difference between Nick and me. Nick is a tactician. I'm a berserker. And I'm just like, oh, bad. And he's like, no, no, please. Play into
Like,
my plan.
we're gonna get Prop 8 passed, man.
Oh,
Oh,
that's good.
so please continue. But actually, you're right though, and this also gets into it's not just the tactician and the berserker, but work from within the system and work from with. So for me,
Yeah.
it's like, let's get Prop 8 passed, because if that goes to the Supreme Court, chances are very good it's dead, and then it's across the board. You've just done it, but you have to get a law that's unacceptable and just grotesquely just you gotta swallow and fight for that law, because you know what's going to happen. But
Well, a
it
lot
wasn't
of it
easy, and then
is,
there's
at every point in my life, I've had to work from without the, from outside the system. I had to self-educate. I've had to, you know, uh, what? All right. So, anyways, so
Did
now
you just
crazy
call me
twist.
a teapot?
Yeah, I did. Uh, no,
The tea
so
party,
crazy
like, okay,
trip
never mind.
to Growly's grandmother's
Yeah,
house.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we took all three kids. This is I believe before treatment. So there's no cancer at this point. So we went up to she has a ranch property. Her grandmother, horse ranch actually. So we go up there, and to say that there was some culture clash would be putting it mildly. So I'll give you my favorite stories from what we call the dark farm. Like there's Tales from the Dark Side. This is Tales from the Dark Farm.
Tales from the Dark Farm. Okay.
Yeah. So the night that we got there, um, this little old lady, sweet looking little old lady. She's got this dog, this Australian Shepherd, and this Australian Shepherd apparently is terrified of camouflage. Now you can imagine being terrified of camouflage in a place with rednecks probably isn't great for a dog. Yeah. Well, so this dog is terrified of camouflage, and Growly just happens to have footy, like full on onesie PJs that are camouflage, and that's what she's wearing. So this dog,
won't ask her why she needs camo PJs, but okay. I mean, if she's planning on, I don't know what she does at night, but fine.
Well, considering where we were going, we might have needed to disappear.
Actually, I suppose, well, considering where you had been, quite frankly, given some of the stories, I might want camo too. But I'd want the stuff for camo in urban areas, not for at any rate.
So this dog is just like freaking, and eventually, this is the first inkling that I got that this woman was straight up evil, and she opens the door and says, "Get out!" And the dog starts to run out. Right now, the dog gets to about like its jawline before the door closes, completely ending any traction the dog has on the linoleum. So the dog's feet are just moving, and the door opens back up, and she goes, "Get out! Get out! Get out!" And with every get out, she's slamming the door on this dog. And I'm just like, part of me is just horrified. The other part of me is laughing because it's the absurdity of the situation of this sweet little old lady, and she's just, oh my God. So and that was just the introduction to this woman's like deep evil, right? So
wow.
we're sitting at the breakfast table. I think it's like the first morning, in fact. And I've got my breakfast, and I'm there's more stories from this, but I just want to tell this one in particular. And this big old truck, it rumbles up into the property, and Marion, that's her name. She looks up and she goes, "Oh, well, that must be my Mexican." I'm like, "You're Mexican. You own a Mexican." "Yep, that's my Mexican, Esteban." And I'm like,
Steven.
Esteban. Okay. I'm like, his name is probably Esteban. And she goes, oh, I know. I call him Esteban. And she just starts cackling. Evil. Cackling.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I go to my wife. I'm like, babe, do you know your grandma owns a Mexican? She's like, oh yeah, I know, she's evil.
No, she thinks she owns a Mexican. Let's just get that. Go to
Right,
that. I
right.
don't think she owns him. Now I may be wrong. In some places in the deep south, maybe that was permissible even not that long ago. But still, that's a stretch.
Okay, apparently she's correcting me. This was during treatment. But yeah, so we went out to go talk to poor Esteban,
Steven.
and we thanked him for taking such kind care of such a sweet old, evil lady, and apologized for the abuse. And the problem was he just looked at us with these sort of like dead eyes. Like there was just like nothing going on, just kind of nodded and goes back to working. It's like, oh my god, you were entirely broken, you poor man. You poor man.
This is the dark farm. You weren't fucking kidding.
I'm not kidding. Her family is nuts. And that's the one that I could probably defend the most, simply because she's so old. It's hard to hate her for what she's done.
But it gets worse.
Oh, the rest of her family gets much.
Somebody pointed this out. Oh no, she owns him. That's the I think she does own him. I think that's he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, she spent a lot of the time while we were there complaining that they teach Spanish in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so
I've been exposed to every spectrum of crazy racism.
Jesus.
But
oh shit.
Moving to Lancaster.
Yes.
Our very first night there, we went to a diner, and it seemed like the most wholesome experience ever. They gave the kids their own table, and they're waiting on them all sweet, And the waitress asks us what's going on. We're like, okay, we're moving into the neighborhood. We're, this is a nice neighborhood and blah, blah, blah. Well, except for all those, and I'm not going to say the word, but it is a very common word for black people in America. And she says this loudly in the diner in public. And so there's that moment where you freeze and you're expecting like a moment to follow, like a boss to come out and go, what the hell, or somebody in the restaurant to get offended or upset. And we look around and people are nodding. They're nodding along. It wasn't long after this that we basically figured out that no, the neighborhood is just that racist. Literally the most common form of graffiti was a swastika.
Oh geez.
Yeah. We had another neighbor who was who we went to he was having a yard sale and moving out. Basically told us that where he was moving, they didn't have that, N problem because they had guns. Yeah.
I assume your bisexual nature was something you kept under wraps as well.
Yeah. Very deeply. So this was about the time that both my wife and I were undergoing our different forms of deconversion from religion. We'd kind of slipped into like kind of non-denominational, just we don't really believe in one kind of thing, but we believe in God and Jesus, and it's the Bible's all metaphorical, and you know what I mean, that kind of thing. We kind of slipped into that, but we were attempting to go to some of the churches in the area, but they were psychotic, and wow.
That's gonna be another show.
We're just
racking up the shows.
Oh yeah. But the thing that actually, now the kids were already atheists because we raised them completely secular, where we said we let them go to several different churches, and we never said that this is what is true. We said this is what we believe, but you can believe whatever you want. The kids, they never found religion. They all said no, it's all bullshit. We're atheists. So they were
Yeah.
actually they were atheists before I ever was. But but what actually deconverted me, and I know the deconversion stories interest you a great deal,
It, yes, sir.
was writing and role playing. And
Really.
what happened was, as I was creating these characters who were having these interesting, like like I want my characters to be fully alive characters in this comic book and in these stories that I'm writing. And a lot of the times we role play out some of the interactions to make sure they feel very natural, they feel very real. And what was
Yep.
really interesting is one of the characters that I created, I wanted him to be this very deep intellectual scientist, and he was atheist. And the first thing I had to do was come up with, well, how would somebody arrive at like anti-theist atheism, right? And so I had to make up
Yeah.
arguments. I had to create arguments for this character. The problem is the arguments that I was having between these fictional characters, the arguments that came from the atheist that I created, that it's all in my head, those arguments were convincing. No,
Yeah.
I couldn't come up with good counter arguments for the Christian character. Not ones that sound. I mean, I knew what he would say because I knew what Christians would say, but they felt so hollow. They never landed on me. So I actually, my own fictional characters talked me into anti-theism.
You were deconverted by a piece of fiction, by a fictional character you wrote.
Yes.
That I like that one. That's one of the that's a unique one.
Yeah. And I I I couldn't speak necessarily for my wife on this, but I think a lot of our role playing in that sphere had a lot to do with it as well. And when I say role playing, by the way, people, I don't necessarily mean role. I don't necessarily. No, I'm kidding. I don't mean role playing like in the bedroom. I mean like tabletop role playing, like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that.
Oh, you didn't. Oh, you didn't mean so the I didn't see, I thought that was like a. You see a thing right over your door. I thought that was like one of the riding crops, and I was sitting there going like, "Well, we haven't gotten to that part of the story yet, but I'm interested." But I guess okay. I guess I will have to. I will have to try to hide my disappointment for that part of the interview. So I think I'm down to about 10, if I'm lucky, 5 minutes. I did want to. So how did you get to sort of where you are now? You're doing art on YouTube. You are creating content. Somebody told me you're doing a show.
hmm
Which but the way you and I met, we can
I think
certainly
that's the
cover at
next
some point.
story
We can
that we
talk
got to
about, but
cover. Yeah.
well, I do think that, but we actually do have it. You and I had been on a stream where this was the featured channel on the GDC,
Mm,
and so we do have, and that is mirrored. So
that's
that is
true.
actually that you can find that here, and we do cover sort of I think both how we met and a bit more about how the show came to fruition. But we can still touch on that. But that's actually been covered. We may still do that ourselves. But so you are where you are now. You get you start doing some YouTube stuff. You start doing your art. How do you get there and to where you are now?
Well, again, it's activism. Um, One of the things that I was telling you earlier is with YouTube and with art, with everything that I do, I'm trying to push ideas into the cultural sphere. And one of the most important ideas for me, the most important, to be quite honest, is the normalization of healthy sexuality. I hate that it is so demonized because it leads to so many problems in our culture. It just from terrible education when it comes to sex ed to even I would blame pedophile priests. I would blame that as a problem of demonization of sexuality. And we could
Mhm.
go into that in another show, but I think it just leads to so many problems. And so normalizing sexuality, one of the reasons I include nudity and sex, for instance, in my comics is not because I'm trying to create a pornographic comic. I mean, if somebody wants to grab their meat while looking at my art, I don't care. But that's not the point. The point is that I believe that sex, nudity, these things are part of the human experience. And I'm not going to censor those pieces of the human experience out because I want them to be considered normal. I think that it should be perfectly acceptable and normal for a beautiful lovemaking scene to be included in a romantic story on television. I don't see how that could be a problem. And there are other parts of my
Oh, you aren't
activism.
religious, are you?
Not even a little bit. So, yeah, that's one of the things that I would like to see happen. It's how I've raised my kids, and I've seen it be a positive in their life and healthy. They have healthy images of their body. They have healthy images of sexuality. You know, my as I once told my daughter, and she has really taken this to heart, you should have all the confidence in the world to walk down Main Street naked if you wanted to, but not feel as though you need to. I think
Good.
that sort of wraps up my views on it. Nobody should feel as though they have to for attention, but no one should feel uncomfortable doing so if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And so that's how I raised my kids, and that's the idea that I'm some of the one of the biggest ideas, that one of the most important ideas to me, pushing out into the social sphere, and that's what I'm trying to do. And then, this in time thing, just it's a platform for all kinds of interesting ideas, and to be exposed to ideas that I didn't even know that were interesting. you know just the other
Yeah.
day with Misha Griffith, I had no idea how interesting the differences between European and American media and their history could be. And I found out all sorts of interesting things. So that's the other thing that I'm doing, is learning. I'm sort of accustomed to self-educating for obvious reasons. Hmm.
We certainly do. We've been very lucky with guests, and I think we also, I mean, we aggressively go out and try to find new ones, and we. But I think the audience benefits, but I think you and I are very much of the same mind, and we are both interested in self-educating and always learning more. And I think our guests tend to reflect that and reflect our interests. So we've lucked out there.
My wife reminded me of something. Our role playing as well, and our writing of characters, helped us both come to terms with and discover our own bisexuality.
Mm.
So that's kind of an interesting. Well, I grew up in a house where, even though my mother was a lesbian, she told me that bisexual people didn't exist, that they were just either confused homosexuals or confused straight people.
Oh, okay. I go. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually, particularly in the past, it was a very common attitude among the gay and lesbian community, was that bisexual people were just, we didn't exist.
Well, and I imagine I imagine in some ways, and we're going to be discussing trans, I think, on our next show. But I imagine that may be similar to how people sort of feel like in when it comes to trans activism, and that uh, it somehow diminishes their identity if there is something alternate to just sort
Right.
of where they are, or if they feel that people are don't have they don't fit that particular mold, then that eradicates their own identity in some way or another. And that I think actually we may approach it from what would appear to be a different side, but I'd argue it's the same thing. I'll discuss that in a minute. But
Yeah.
I am going to need to be heading out soon, but I wanted to thank you very much. It's 6, 8 months, depending on how you choose to measure it. We finally got the interview done, I think. Was there anything else that we missed that you wanted to hit on, or?
Um, I don't really think so. I think that covers the majority of it. Where I think
No,
most of my recent life has been kind of played out here on In Time. We've talked about it, so you know, yeah.
let me ask you a question just for the people because there are people who know this story and who want to know more. But so now you're going to be moving soon. Is that where you're moving to, and under what circumstances?
Well, for one, our roommate is disgusting, and but he is going to be leaving to go move in with his parents soon, and there's no place here in California that we can afford to rent with the amount of money that we make. And uh, a good friend of ours in Wisconsin has offered us a place to live with her to get on our feet, save up some money, get a place of our own, and so we're going to be moving there. And in when we do so, we're actually going to be video logging it, vlogging it. We'll probably be putting it up on my channel, and we will also be attempting to visit with people in this great community along the way who want us to visit. We actually had planned on visiting someone who recently passed away, um, and that was actually rather tragic. But we're gonna make it positive, and we're still gonna go visit the. I don't want to bring up all of that, but we're gonna go visit some of the places we were gonna visit with him, and we're going to visit whoever else along the way might want to meet up. So, and we're willing to kind of go out of our way here and there.
Well, good. I know a number of people who already that you've been talking about. You're gonna meet some of my closest friends before I get to meet them physically. I don't know how I feel about that. I think I'm a little upset,
Yeah,
but I think that's marvelous. All right. Well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope that Wisconsin ends up working out.
yeah, me too. I think it will. It'll be cheaper. It'll be cooler.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, that's well. It was funny because um, when you had been talking about sleeping, trying to find a place that was warm and comfortable, I was saying there, going, yeah, but how did you not die? I was like, oh yeah,
Mm.
you're not in Massachusetts, which
Kitty,
Wisconsin gets colder, but in Massachusetts there are nights where yeah, you'll die of exposure. You have to find a solution
yeah.
to that problem.
Kitty asked, "Didn't she marry many men?" Though I have the confused for my mother. Yes, my mother's a lesbian. However, she married many men because she was attempting to conform to what she believed a child needed, um, which was a mother and a father. That was a very common idea at the time, and so she was attempting to conform to a certain lifestyle for the sake of having a child. Um, I thought when I was younger that all of the problems were, when she got with that first woman, I assumed that all of the domestic problems were because she was attempting to live a life. No, she's kept picking horrible people. I mean, it's been she's with a lovely woman now, but she went through three abusive women on her way to the woman that she's yeah. So three abusive men, three abusive women. She just doesn't pick well, and finally got lucky. So yeah,
Kiss enough frogs, you finally find your princess.
I like that.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Ansgar, very much for finally we finally got this done,
Yeah,
and uh, we I think this is great. I'm sure Ansgar would be more than happy to discuss any more. Anyone wants to contact him on Twitter, his details will be in the description. and, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of In Time. Tomorrow we are going to be having a discussion on sort of trans issues, but also how the misreporting or misunderstanding of trans issues makes it much harder to fight for and sort of false flagging and false white
and bad
knighting
actors and all kinds of
bad
things.
actors.
Yeah,
Yeah, and people who do sort of take that for their own um, what damage that done it does and how to fight it. So thank you all for joining us. Ansgar, thank you again for joining us as a guest this time. And from
uh,
everyone here on In Time, have a good night, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.